What are 10 common painting mistakes that DIYers make? Hey guys, Steve here with Braun's Painting Network, and let's talk about this because maybe I can save you some grief from making some of these blunders. And you don't necessarily have to be a DIYer. Maybe you're just a less experienced painter, or you're somebody that's looking to get into the trade. And I may be able to save you some grief as well with some of these things that we're going to talk about. Let's start off with number one and just talk about the high occurrence that people get the wrong tools, materials, or supplies, and they kind of set themselves up for failure before they even get started. This could be something like the wrong size brush, or maybe using a straight brush versus an angled sash brush. Maybe you have the wrong thickness or size roller cover, maybe the wrong spraying tip. You might have the wrong preparation material, maybe an inappropriate caulk, or you're not pairing the right joint compounds with the right tapes. So there's a lot that can be involved with a residential painting project. And if you don't have the knowledge and the information and the research to make sure you're using the right products, you can really set yourself up for failure right from the get-go. Now, another issue, number two, is people often don't leave themselves enough time for the project. Painting has a tendency to be very, I guess, underestimated with number one, how challenging it can be, but number two, how long it takes. Oh, it's just painting a room. I'll do that on Saturday morning. I'll knock that out in a couple of hours. But in reality, if you're doing things properly, there's no way that that's enough time to paint a room when you factor in all the things that need to be done with what I refer to as the 5 pillars, which is properly setting up for a job, to properly do proper job site protection, to properly prepare all your surfaces, to apply the paint in the right manner, and then clean up after yourself. There's no way you can get that done in a couple of hours. And people often assume that it's a very simple thing, and what happens is they end up with they either quit once they realize that it's much more difficult than they realized, and they end up with a partially completed job, or they rush it and they get poor results because they're not allowing enough time for the repairs to dry, for example. They're not allowing for enough dry time between coats of paint. They haven't protected their floors and furniture properly, so now there's splatters all over the place or dust. And again, it all comes down to the fact that you didn't allow enough time. So very important to give yourself that time, and don't underestimate how challenging a paint job could be. So number 3, people are not properly preparing their surfaces before they just jump into painting. The basic rule of thumb is that your surfaces need to be dry, they need to be clean, they need to be dull, and they need to be in sound condition. So there's quite a bit of things that are involved with that. I think clean kind of speaks for itself. You got to wipe food and dust off your surfaces, but you can't be painting over really glossy surfaces. There should be some scuff sanding going on, or the use of a bonding primer. Sound condition is, if you have holes and cracks, flaking paint, those types of things, I kind of refer to them as open wounds. You need to address those because you're going to have adhesion problems. There are some aesthetic anomalies and imperfections that you don't necessarily have to take care of because they're not an open wound. But if it's a screw hole, if it's a crack, if it's flaking paint, if it's a water stain or mildew, you need to take care of those things because you're going to the paint's going to fail and you just ended up wasting your time. All right, so number 4, people are not properly protecting the job site. What I mean by that is the components in the house, the belongings, or your floors, carpet, hardwoods, vinyl floors, appliances, countertops, furniture, chandeliers, light fixtures. I think you get the idea, but we're not doing a good enough job protecting them. I think people are like, well, no, I'll be careful and I'm good, as long as, and then they feel like if they don't see a huge drip of paint fall down and splatter on the floor, they're good. What you don't realize is there are little micro drips of paint, especially if you're rolling overhead, rolling a ceiling, or even when you're rolling walls. I promise you, there are little specks of paint that you might not be able to see them really falling as you're going, but they are falling. They're hitting your floor, they're hitting furniture, and it isn't going to be until the end that you're going to see these little speckles, or maybe you won't ever see it, but your wife's going to come in and she's going to be like, oh my God, you made a mess. What did you do? So we're not protecting well enough against paint splatter. And we're also not protecting against dust. We're sanding things. We're pulling walls apart. We're sanding sheetrock dust, and we haven't realized that that's just going to carry into the next room. We're not putting barriers up or whatever. So we got to do a better job. This is a very common problem I see when I go into homes that has had DIYer or inexperienced painters. Is there's just paint all over the place, on the floors, on furniture. It's on hinges, it's on hardware. So you got to have a plan in place to protect. Number 5 is related. We're not doing a good enough job protecting ourselves with PPE, particularly from dust, especially. Project dust is a big one, or paint splatter in the eyes, or for example, or if it's fumes or overspray and particulates from spraying. Also, respiratory protection from that. And also we should want to be minimizing how much contact our skin is taking. So what are some of the things you can do? The most important one is having a respirator or a mask on your face, and it can be a N95 dust mask when you're sanding. That's going to be good. If you're brushing and rolling paint and you got good ventilation, it's not really necessary to have a ventilator, but it's really important when you're creating dust, when you're sanding, when you are maybe sawing something. And if you're operating spray equipment, it's hugely important. In fact, you should wear a half face respirator in that case. Also, if you have the possibility of creating lead dust, homes prior to 1978, the older the home is, if you're having to scrape paint or create dust from old paint, there is an increasing likelihood that you're creating lead dust, and it's very important that you protect yourself from that and others. Don't have the time to go over all of that in this video. Just know that you need to make those precautions. And there's even a more in-depth, a P100 mask is recommended for that. So we got to protect ourselves. If you're knocking down plaster walls and you could be creating plumes of asbestos. So I'm not trying to scare people, but you should be understanding that these projects can have harmful effects. If you're not using respirators, you definitely want eyewear protection, safety glasses, especially when you're rolling overhead, because the splatters, I promise you, they're going to be all over your face. You don't want to get it in your eye. What are the chances that you have an eye wash station in your house? Probably not very good, unless you're a huge safety nerd. Then maybe you do. And then try, there's things you can do to keep excess paint off your skin. You can wear gloves. I know a lot of painters laugh at that, but what's the big deal to wear some gloves and make it a lot easier to clean your hands? So that's some very basic things you can do to protect yourself. So let's move on. Number 6 is a lot of inexperienced painters are hurting themselves by doing things out of order, and sometimes it's affecting the quality of the job, but it also can have some real efficiency problems and maybe things are taking a lot longer. But there's a lot to talk about here, but there is a proper order of operations. Typically, you're going to work top down when you're painting. You would want to paint a ceiling before walls so that you're not getting ceiling splatter all over freshly painted walls. That's a really common one. You would want to paint the baseboards at the bottom of the wall after you do everything above it. It could be very helpful to paint window and door casings before you paint the walls so that it's easier to get really nice cut lines. And then there's just a lot of different orders as it relates to the way that you would prepare surfaces, fix cracks. And there's also some flexibility that you need to have with when it comes to order of operations so that you can make things are very efficient. But if what I would recommend if you're considering taking on your own project or you want to get into this trade, understand that there is a right order and learn about that because it'll make a big difference in your efficiency and in your quality. All right, number 7 is a lot of DIYers or inexperienced painters don't fully understand everything that's involved with paint colors and sheens. And often you won't understand the impact that light can have on a color, or that some types of colors might require primer, undercoats, multiple coats when you're doing color changes, how colors might interact with each other based on their warmth or coolness, or whether they're complementary colors or whatever. But ultimately, sheen is a big one where people they don't quite understand how the gloss level, which is what sheen is, will impact the way the finish looks. And also the functionality of a job. The higher the gloss level of a paint, the more durable it is, and the easier it is to clean and scrub. But on the flip side, there are some factors aesthetically that the glossiness might make it not as attractive. It might show more unsightly application texture, or defects, wall imperfections will become more visible. So there is a lot of things to consider about that before you even start your project, and that's where getting the help of a professional or the experienced people in the paint stores usually can give you really good information on helping you understand that. The other thing too is how, when it comes to sheen and color, is how that can impact the way that you might want to apply paint, or how easily painting projects can be touched up down the road. All right, if it's a very flat, low sheen, low gloss level paint, especially lighter colors, it's a lot easier to touch up a section of a wall without it being noticeable than if you had a very glossy paint or you're using very deep, bold colors. Trying to go back and touch up a little area on a wall after the fact could be very difficult. An application method plays a role there too. Number 8 is there's often a lack of knowledge about primers and when primers should be used, when they're really important, when they would be helpful, and when they're not necessary. The other thing is number of coats. Should you do 1 coat? Do you need 2? Do you need 3 coats? I think there can be very easy to have confusion there, and both ways. Sometimes people will be like, don't worry about it. There's nothing to worry about. Just throw the paint on there, get it done. 1 coat, you're out of there. Vice versa, somebody might say, if you didn't use a primer, you're a complete hack. And, the truth is in the middle, because there are instances where really high quality paints are self-priming when something has been already painted before and it's been properly prepared. There are plenty of instances where really good high quality paints are self-priming and you don't need to prime. That being said, there's a lot of instances that you do need to prime, and that might be when something's very worn or soiled, stains, something is extremely glossy or difficult to stick substrate. When you're doing significant color changes, or you're trying to apply a very bold paint color, or simply when something's never been painted before, new sheetrock, raw wood. Okay, those are all things that are going to need primer applications. So definitely really important to understand that. And then as far as coats go, what I could tell you is if you're doing a color change, you're almost always going to want to do 2 coats of paint just to get optimum hide and beautiful aesthetic results. Applying 2 coats on a new paint job is also going to ensure that you got really good mill thickness and your paint's going to perform. It's not going to fade as quickly, and you're going to get good durability and scrubbability because you got proper layers of paint on there. Although there are instances, if you're not changing color, you just want to do a nice refresh, then you might only need 1 coat. If you're doing interior painting and it's just a fresh coat of the same color paint, or you want a fresh coat on the trim, then you're going to be fine just applying one coat of paint. So, okay, number 9, very underrated and under the radar, but many inexperienced painters or DIYers don't realize that when you buy separate containers of the same paint and color, for example, you're painting a bedroom and you bought 2 gallons of wall paint for your bedroom walls, or you're painting your shed and you bought 3 gallons. It's all the same product, it's all the same color, but what you should always be doing is intermixing that paint so that if you, for example, if you don't do that and say you use up the whole first gallon and you stop halfway in the middle of a wall or the side of a structure, and then you open up the next can and you pick up where you left off, you may be able to see the difference between the 2 different cans. And it's not really that anybody made a mistake. It's just that every can of paint might have just a little bit more or less of the pigment, the titanium dioxide. There might be, you're relying on dispensers that shoot the colorant into the can, and maybe there's just was a little off on one section. So you would be a difference that you wouldn't notice from like one wall to the other wall, or one side of a house to the other side of a house. But if you're trying to do it in the same wall or side and it's in the middle, you can have some real disasters. Like you cut in a wall with a brush and then you try to roll it from 2 separate cans. It might be subtle, but enough that it's going to be like, oh my God, I hate how that looks, and now you got to repaint it. So intermixing those cans in a bucket, or just dumping them back and forth into each other or your paint pan and stirring it up, will ensure that you're not going to have that problem. So intermix your paint. It's also referred to as boxing your paint. I have some videos on that in the channel. One where I actually literally box a can of paint. I thought it was funny. The video didn't do very good, but if you can find it on the channel, check it out. I think it's worth a laugh. All right. The last one, number 10, is the idea of keeping a wet edge when you're painting. And that just means, for example, interior painting. We're painting a bedroom. Highly recommended that you don't go and cut in with a brush the entire room first and then go back and roll it. Because by the time you're rolling over that, you're going to have dry paint on your edges, and then you're rolling back over a segment of that with your roller, and sometimes that can be a problem. Now, I will tell you that there are times where it won't be. High quality paints, lower sheen paints, flat, matte, lighter colors. Honestly, it's probably not going to matter if you're using a quality paint. You could probably do this. It'll all blend in, lay down, and look great. But it's still good habits to get into, to cut a wall, roll a wall. Cut a wall, roll a wall. Or better yet, you have a couple of people cutting the wall in front of you, and then you roll behind them, and you kind of, everything's happening while there's a wet edge, and you're not having any issues there. Where it is a bigger concern is when the darker the color and the glossier the sheen, the more likely it is to have overlaps, or what they might refer to as flashing paint, because you didn't keep a wet edge. This can be really important on exterior painting, like on the side of a house, especially with clapboard siding, horizontal or vertical siding, where continuous edges, especially with solid color stains that are penetrators, it can be a real issue if you're painting the side of a house and you stop in the middle of a long horizontal run, you take a lunch break, or you're just making a really complicated ladder move and you stop, and then you have to move really, and you come back, and then where that overlap is, you're probably, because the prior section dried before you went back over it, you're almost always going to have flashing as a result of that overlap. So the ways to defeat that is to try to keep a wet edge, run a few boards at a time, work out of the sun to prolong your wet time, your work time, and try to make smart ladder moves. Maybe it's having a lift rented so you can move really quickly, or having 2 or 3 guys knocking out a section so you can reduce that. I will tell you that better quality products also make a difference. For example, Benjamin Moore makes a stain called Arbor Coat. They have an ultra flat version that gives you more room for error. to not be as likely to flash. But I'll tell you, even that will flash if you paint a section, walk away, let it dry, and come back. So that's what I have. Those are some 10 very common mistakes that inexperienced painters make. What I will tell you is that, or what you may have noticed, is we didn't even talk about application errors, like sags and runs and poor cut lines and crashing and tags and holidays and overspray disasters. We didn't even talk about safety blunders and stuff like that. So there's a lot that's involved with residential painting jobs. These, I think, the ones I gave you are kind of maybe less. Some of them might be obvious, some less obvious. Hopefully, we've been able to make an impact with somebody out there is going to be like, oh man, I'm glad I watched this. Thank you. You saved me from making that mistake.
Braun's painting saved me.
We appreciate it. So if you enjoyed that, then, please give us a thumbs up. Throw a comment down if you need, or ask a question. Would love a subscription if you wouldn't mind hitting. It's a free, obviously, if you're not familiar, but we're getting close to 1,000 subscribers. I would like to hit that threshold here in the near future. So check out our channel if you want to learn. All of this stuff I talked about, I got videos. There's all kinds of videos. I got, 7, 8 different playlists. There's the Paint Trainer series. There's simple how-to videos. There's a lot of shorts content. A minute or less, where we address a lot of these things. So thank you for watching. Hope it was helpful. Happy painting.